about a month ago, the nation's attention was tuned into 24-hour news channels, CNN specifically, waiting for word about the missing Malaysian airplane. What happened to those 270-plus people who just fell from the radar? In mid-April, reports started to trickle out of Nigeria. 276 teenage girls were in school taking a test when they were kidnapped by armed men. A few dozen are said to have escaped, but their whereabouts and safety is not known. Till just a few days ago, that story, the one in Nigeria, was largely unreported here in the United States. Yesterday, as we were getting word of another 8 kidnappings, the Obama administration announced it would send the FBI in to help try and find those girls. This is a really big deal. How is it that word of it didn't really make it in the Western media or spread until now, weeks later?
Well, I think it's one of those, for lack of a better phrase, a perfect storm of an international story that's involving Africa. And when it comes to the mainstream media, the American mainstream media, we have cut back so much on international coverage that you run the risk of these things happening. And then you throw in the fact that it's happening in Africa, which is a country that we've never really covered much of. And that may, some people may say that revolves around race. The fact that, you're not talking about Europeans, you're not talking about whites, you're not talking about China, which has this explosion in terms of economics. You're talking about Africa, which is seen as a third world area. And you're talking about an issue that just does not resonate with an American audience until you see this explosion on social media. And now all of a sudden the mainstream media is like, whoa, wait a minute, we got to pay attention now. Because
using that hashtag of bring back our girls.
Bring back our girls. And then they start looking at it, and then they start connecting it to the fact that you are talking about children and you are talking about something heinous. And now all of a sudden it starts to resonate when you pull back away from the fact that it's race, the fact that it is Africa, the fact that it is international, and start focusing in on the humanity of it or the tragedy of it. Then all of a sudden it becomes a story.
I mean, I'll say it. It's partly about race. It's not all about that, but it's partly about race, both in terms of the journalists and the American public's appetite for the stories. But there's a lot of other things, and I think that Ernest mentioned many of them. There are the pullbacks in terms of international bureaus. There were other stories, and especially on cable TV news, there's a lot of focus on stories that are easier to get to, whether it was the ferry in South Korea or the missing plane. You are talking about, if you really want to tell that story visually in Nigeria, are you going to send reporters into the part of the country that's where Boko Haram is in control? It's a more difficult story to tell, but I still think that it's really shameful that it took the social media, people using basically Twitter to get this story out there for American media and American politicians to finally pay attention.
But this isn't the first time this happened. I mean, there have been numerous stories over the last several years in which social media has been the one driving the bus. And race has been one of the issues involved in that. I mean, Trayvon Martin, the Trayvon Martin story basically exploded because of what was happening on social media, and then the mainstream media picked up on it. Now the local Florida media was on top of it.
Right, again, weeks after the fact.
But weeks after the fact, all of a sudden the national media comes into play. Here we go again, the same thing. So, Mike, I think you're right. I don't want to say that race is not playing a part here, because it's playing a huge part. But one of the things that's really bothering me is that now all of a sudden you have a lot of people jumping on the Obama administration basically saying, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? When they aren't really thinking about the fact that this is a sovereign country. We can't just march in and say, hey, we're going to take over the investigation. We are the Americans. We know what we're doing. I mean, we don't have a great relationship with Nigeria to begin with. So to think that we can just jump in and tell them we're going to find these girls for you and save the day, it just doesn't work that way.
I mean, one of the more sad parts of this story is the fact that the Nigerian government apparently was very slow to respond, didn't want to take this on because they're getting ready to host a World Economic Forum in Nigeria, and this is the kind of story that makes the government look bad when they're trying to ascend as a power in Africa. Now, by the time we are finally reporting this story and it's getting a lot of attention, it very well may be too late for most of those girls. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to tell the story, because that problem and the potential, as you said, there have been more kidnappings just this week. We need to shine attention on it to see if anything can be done, at least prospectively.